Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 20th of February 2025. And there's an awful lot to get through. I've also got to rush a bit because I've just looked at a thread that I was supposed to have looked at previously, and I'm going to the pub tonight and I didn't know. And so there is that. I also just had my mate from, well, he's a British mate, married to an American artist, who he's a statistician, works out in Sweden at a university in Sweden, but he's now a digital nomad as she's got an exhibition in Lisbon and whatnot. He's been living in Lisbon for a couple of years in Portugal. And he was over today just like, hey, I'm back in the UK, let's have a cup of tea. One of my best mates, went to school with him, but he works in academia and statistics. And he's got some really interesting things to say on USAID funding, which is just, honestly, there's so many far-reaching consequences to the slash and burn of the US government at the moment. But we'll come to that in a second. Right, so we're going to start with this. So the UN has reaffirmed that Zelensky remains a legitimate president of Ukraine. Who knew they'd have to do that? This is following President Trump's remarks that Zelensky is a dictator. We're going to talk about that again later in terms of some of the responses to that from around the world. But I just in terms of he's a dictator, they need elections. It turns out that 63.3% of Ukrainians are against elections while martial law is still in place. And this percentage will likely increase after Trump's idiotic statements. In other words, that was taken before those opinions were taken before Trump's remarks. So a stable peace with security guarantees must precede elections. So there is that. Then you've got opposition MPs like Ukrainian MP Lizia Vasylenko saying, I'm an opposition MP, still we're speaking with one voice. And then Christian Gurumurthy, who's a Channel 4 news presenter, says, would you describe Zelensky as a dictator? She says, we are living in martial law because Russia has attacked Ukraine. We have no choice but to live in martial law to protect ourselves. Is President Zelensky a dictator? No. He is a president of a free democratic country which is fighting for its survival. And indeed, the two major opposition leaders, including Poroshenko, who's being investigated for like treason and etc., both of those have said Zelensky should rule until elections, and elections shouldn't take place until after there is peace sorted out. So you've got the Americans pressuring for Zelensky to go, and indeed we're going to talk about that later. But how about asking the Ukrainian people themselves and opposition leaders? It's just incredible. So there you go. I think that's worth considering. Right. Now, EU ambassadors reportedly have agreed on the 16th package of Russian sanctions, that it will look at sanctioning further the shadow fleet of oil tankers and aluminium imports as well. Aluminium industry and shadow fleet, according to the Financial Times, also includes individuals and entities aiding Russia in its war against Ukraine. However, we're hearing today that Hungary won't back extending EU sanctions on Russian and Belarusian individuals as time is needed for US-Russia talks, according to Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó. Hungary also rejects a €20 billion Ukraine aid package. So, my goodness, I don't know what's going to happen with that. It looks like, goodness me, Hungary and Slovakia. Ugh. Shashank Joshi is quoting from The Economist here. He might have written this, I don't know. Not all Europeans were happy with Mr. Macron's mini summit. Georgia, so this was the one that took place a few days ago. I had this, ready to speak to you about 2 days ago, but live streams not gotten away, but I wonder if they've met again, actually. Anyway, Meloni was reportedly cross at the exclusion of smaller countries, not least because the format draws attention to Italy and Spain's poor performance on defence. Interesting. So as a result of that Macron called Ukraine summit, there have been some opinions on that. This is the Kyiv Independent looking to some experts to get their opinions. I've highlighted a few. I'm not going to say their names and who they are, but anyway, varied opinions. Unless and until they reach an agreement, Europeans will not have much to say, if any, in the negotiations. So they need to. One of the kind of takeaway points is they need a unified voice. We Europeans still have difficulties accepting that, at least for now, and for this presidency, the United States is no longer a reliable ally and is possibly even an opponent. Regime change has happened in Washington, however, and the informal summit in Paris tried to come to terms with the implications that Europe will have to do a lot more to support Ukraine. Another one says, and second, what is the right balance to strike between favouring the European defence industry to assert greater sovereignty from the US and procuring equipment from the US to keep the Trump administration can engage in European security affairs. That's exactly the point I've been making over the last week. Exactly the point. You don't want to annoy the Americans so much that they stop aid to Ukraine. That's the important aid, but also the Americans are going to be thinking, well, we still want to sell stuff to our European allies and Ukraine, but the Europeans will want to buy stuff from Europe, but keep the US a little bit sweet by buying stuff from the US. So there are all these tensions going on that I find fascinating. Someone else says, but the results are mixed, exposing the existing divisions among the EU countries and states that want to join the peacekeeping efforts in Ukraine and those that remain rather lukewarm on this. At the same time, the wide consensus was on more military spending and investments, as well as maintaining political unity and a strong transatlantic bond. And then someone else says, even if the US President Trump is unpredictable, his statements recently and during his first administration leave no doubt that he expects Europe to do more for its own security. So relying on some sort of vague hope that he might change his mind and continue to provide the same amount of support for European security as has previously been the case is naive and dangerous. Unfortunately, we did not see any sort of plan in Paris or indication of a forthcoming plan coming out of the meeting in Paris. And then someone else says the interesting decision not to invite all EU leaders was poorly received by the rest of the bloc, once again providing figures like Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico with an opportunity to push narratives of conflicting interests and divisions among EU member states. Of course, that was always going to happen. The real danger here is that public perception may shift toward believing in a division within the EU between warmongers and peace supporters. And then final one here, the summit in Paris produced a message but not results. The message is that European states are able to come together swiftly and that they are aware of how challenging the situation is. So kind of lots more to come, which is why I think another meeting was organised. I don't know if that's taken place. Goodness me, it's all happening so quickly. By the way, I have a couple of really big bits of news coming from the US, which is not good, not looking good for Ukraine and for global unity behind supporting Ukraine. And indeed, it makes the US look even more like an adversary. It's just insane what is going on. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said this is worse than the Cold War. She's called up for a radical ramp up in Danish defence spending, and in fact I reported on that in my military aid video. Go and check that out if you want to see the details of what the Danish are going to do, and they are leading the way. France is to host a second summit, but that's supposed to have been yesterday, but I haven't heard too much about a second summit there. So I think it might have been a virtual summit, and they got together virtually with a lot more leaders as well. I'm starting to remember now. Right, former UK US Ambassador and National Security Advisor Sir Kim Darroch. This is really interesting. Keir Starmer was a prominent figure at yesterday's emergency meeting, he said, of the first meeting. That gives him a certain credibility to be listened to in the White House. He's become quickly rather a pivotal figure for Europe in this. I talked previously about there needs to be someone to lead European support for Ukraine. And as Boris Johnson kind of went by the wayside, we're kind of wondering who that was going to be. And it was looking like it was going to be Emmanuel Macron. He started coming to prominence, but then there were the domestic political challenges with the Rassemblement National coming up, a snap election, European elections going badly for some of the centrist parties and for supporters for Ukraine. And that has meant Emmanuel Macron took a back seat where he was being rhetorically very strong. Olaf Scholz isn't strong enough. Giorgia Meloni, I don't think, is inclusive enough in Europe. And weirdly, it could be Keir Starmer, who's kind of a bit centristy and a bit outside the European bloc, but not in the EU, but could be a unifying force within Europe as a continent for Ukraine. Now, there'll be some on the right in the UK who'll be like, no, whatever, hate Starmer, blah, blah, blah. But who else is it going to be? And Starmer has positioned himself fairly pivotally, I think, in these talks. It's an interesting one, that, because he's not naturally charismatic, but he could develop into a politician who is quite central, really, in more ways than one. British public opinion on Vladimir Putin is fascinating. Putin is popular. I mean, I can't believe you would have 66% of a political party thinking that Donald Trump is the way forward favourable at the moment, but 49% of Reform voters think rewind. 14. Yeah. Okay, I've got that all wrong. We have Putin is universally unpopular, but 12% of reform voters think that he have favourable views on him. So, okay, it's not huge, but reform voters are more likely to be favourable of Putin, and that kind of translates to less favourable of Zelensky, and then more favourable of Trump. So reform are your MAGA American voters, as they would be if they were British. And you're seeing less favourability for Zelensky there. Whereas all the other parties, including Conservatives, are overwhelmingly unfavourable, have unfavourable views of Putin, and overwhelmingly have favourable views of Zelensky, and generally kind of unfavourable views of Trump. More so Conservatives there on Trump, but not nearly as much as Reform. So that's an interesting set of data points. Right. Aaron Bastani, who I normally like, but he's a real left-wing Novara media guy, very thoughtful, quite philosophical, very knowledgeable, actually lives locally, lives in Pompey. He is Portsmouth. I don't agree with him on Ukraine. I think he's misjudged Ukraine. But there's an interesting point here about the direction of travel for the sunk cost fallacy idea, whereas, where a lot of European nations, the United Kingdom included, have put a lot of money behind Ukraine. And what the US is doing at the moment is arguably wasting the money that we put into Ukraine. So it's not only are we standing behind Ukraine from a moral political point of view, but kind of a sunk cost fallacy. We put this much money into supporting Ukraine. Come on, it's got to mean something. Whereas the US are just like, they're trying to recoup their money by extorting it through natural resource contracts and whatnot, extraction. But the EU and Europe, the wider European countries and other nations who support Ukraine, they've pumped in a bunch of money to support Ukraine for the right reasons, for strategic reasons, moral reasons, political reasons, etc., etc. They're going to be pretty annoyed if this all goes south because of the US, because that's money that the US has essentially squandered on our behalf. Interesting. Right. Fake videos are coming out about the German election at the moment that are identical to what came out of the American election. Remember a fake video in October that showed a fake poll worker destroying a pro-Trump election ballots in Pennsylvania? Is now a copycat fake video, the same script about the German election showing a fake poll worker destroying election ballots for the AfD. Oh dear, we have Russia doing it again. Now, Turkey is supporting Ukraine's NATO membership, according to Zelensky, who went to Turkey at around the time of the Riyadh peace negotiations. The Ukrainian president says Erdogan understands the importance of Kyiv's NATO bid, which is in stark contrast to the US statements. And indeed, Turkey is becoming a potentially important player here. There's a good article to be written one day, says Michael Weiss, about Turkey's role, both transparent and hidden, in the Russia-Ukraine war. They're fascinating. They've straddled that fence. But actually, when it comes to rhetoric, Erdogan has always supported the territorial integrity of and sovereignty of Ukraine back to the 1991 borders. That is huge. Like, say what you like about Erdogan and what Turkey have done and the money laundering that goes on there of Russian money. They've actually said the right things. Erdogan just threw down the gauntlet. Turkey backs Ukraine's full territorial integrity, so they reiterated there. Turkey ain't just some side player in this. They control the Black Sea, they control NATO's southern flank, and now Erdogan is making it clear Russia's land grab is not up for negotiation. Fascinating. And indeed, some people are saying that they should be the nation that is the host of proper negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, not the US necessarily. Turkey supports the territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence of Ukraine. At the same time, I emphasize that we shall provide all support to conclude the negotiations with the establishment of sustainable peace. And that was Erdogan himself. Fascinating. Now, one of the key importers of Russian oil, the Turkish oil holding Tupras, has announced a temporary suspension of purchases of Russian Urals crude oil. They received the final cargoes this month. Now, due to US sanctions, they will no longer buy Russian oil. And this is the importance of US sanctions. And another bit of bad news is that US sanctions are being used as leverage. There are claims that the Americans have threatened to pull sanctions on Russia. It's not looking good. Telegraph reports that the UK Prime Minister, and I reported this earlier, is bringing an Anglo-French peace plan for Ukraine to the US. Go and watch my hits and losses video to see details of this, but it does include 30,000 European troops deployed at cities, ports, and other critical infrastructures far from the front line, among other things as well. So that's interesting. But again, go and look at my other video on that. Prince Mohammed had wanted Zelensky, so this is Saudi Arabia, they'd actually wanted Zelensky to be represented at the negotiations, and both the Americans and Russians insisted that they weren't, which, again, absolutely staggering. And as we get towards talking about the US, as I told you this morning, I just found this really revealing, and it's really good to see, I think, even our tabloids in the UK standing behind Ukraine. Indeed, I think the Daily Mail headline was something like "Trump appalls the world" or whatever. They were broadly, everyone is fairly pro-Ukraine in this, and you can see that reflected in the political parties and their statements. Not Reform, but the Conservatives. Kemi Badenoch even has come out and really overtly supported Zelensky over Trump, which is fascinating. Here we got Putin's poodle, Orange Man Baby, blames Ukraine for being invaded. What a tagline there for the Daily Star, one of our tabloid newspapers. Quite incredible. Now, this is an absolute shocker, but the US apparently, now pinch of salt, we don't know this for sure, this is coming from a Finnish member of the European Parliament. The US has threatened European governments as follows: agree on the terms of Ukraine's surrender within 3 weeks, or we withdraw from Europe, military from Europe. The source is Mika Tola, a member of the European Parliament, formerly director of the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. I know him, he's solid, says Edward Hunter Christie. And just to go to the original piece from him, this is fascinating. The United States has given us 3 weeks to agree on the terms of Ukraine's surrender. If we don't, the United States will withdraw from Europe. Trump prioritizes Russia's security concerns now and in the future. Let them own their mess. We have 3 weeks to grow up. Wow. Okay, so let's go on to some really, I think, bad news about what's going on with regard to Trump's approach to Ukraine and to Russia and to global security. So if you remember, Trump came out and said terrible things, calling blaming Zelensky for the war, saying he only had 4% approval ratings, basically lying about Ukraine, lying about the numbers, lying about everything. And then came out with that statement on Truth Social that called Zelensky a dictator. And this caused a massive panic yesterday. We had that live stream. I had a 2.5-hour live stream with Greg Terry to talk about this. As Edward Hunter Christie says, Trump has massively stepped up his Kremlin prostitution and lies, attacking Zelensky's legitimacy, lying about his popularity, blaming Kiev for the war, pushing the elections in Ukraine as Moscow wants, and again lying about the extent of US assistance versus European assistance. Trump's lies are being sponsored by Fox News, who invite pro-Moscow commentators who spread crude Kremlin speaking points. I've seen a couple of things on Fox News that are good, like Bill Browder on there correcting Maria Bartiromo, and a few others being slightly more nuanced than they have previously been. So that's some hints of good news. One in particular is presented incredibly as a former US defense this was bad. Former US defense intelligence officer, a Russian American by the name of Rebecca Kurfler, clearly a Kremlin agent. There have been some really bad views on Fox as well. But anyway, then you had the Truth Social post from Trump and it all went bad. So the reaction to that was phenomenal for Zelensky, where apart from Republican Americans, or some Republican Americans in the Trump administration, everyone circled around wagons for Trump, for Zelensky. Sorry, too many words, too much going on. Right. Europe pulled together. Canada pulled together. I don't know about other nations. Like, it'd be interesting. I presume Australia and New Zealand. I don't know, actually. If you're an Aussie or Kiwi, let me know. I'm going to not read all of them to you because there's too many to read to you, but I will read Macron's because some interesting rhetoric here. I've once again had a long conversation with several colleagues from the European Union, as well as Canada, Iceland and Norway, says Macron. France with its partners have a clear and united position. We seek a long-lasting and solid peace in Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine and will take full responsibility to ensure peace and security in Europe. Now, I presume he's talking on behalf of the EU and Canada, Iceland and Norway, as opposed to him and France for taking full responsibility for security in Europe. But that's big. This is a fundamental interest of France, and I am its guarantor. So this is where, like, wow, this could be Emmanuel Macron being really, not bombastic, but really strong, really robust, and saying, I am the guarantor for France's interest, a fundamental interest in supporting Ukraine. And it could be that we will take, we, as in France, will stand. But then if you're following the subject of that sentence back to the previous sentence, then that is the European Union, Canada, Iceland and Norway. So there's a switching of subjects there. But either way, I think it's both the EU and France will be really strong in guaranteeing European security and indeed solid and long-lasting peace for Ukraine. We share the objective, which is also that of President Trump, to put an end to Russia's war of aggression, which has been ongoing for nearly 3 years now. Our efforts for peace will continue in accordance with the following principles, which are in our own interest. Ukraine must always be included and its rights must be respected. Peace must be lasting and accompanied by robust and credible guarantees. The security concerns of Europeans must be taken into account. We must be at the table, in other words. We are convinced of the need to increase our defence and security spending and capabilities for Europe and each of our countries. Decisions will be made in the coming days and weeks. So I thought that was strong. Then you had Justin Trudeau. I would play this to you on any other day. Really strong words in support of Ukraine very publicly. Olaf Scholz came out and said, expressed his support for Zelensky after Trump's remarks. It's simply wrong and dangerous to deny Zelensky's legitimacy. He's elected head of state, and according to the Ukrainian constitution, there should be no elections during the war. Nobody should claim otherwise. And Friedrich Merz also came out and supported Zelensky over, Trump. Petr Pavel also, to call the president of such a country a dictator requires a great deal of cynicism. Petr Pavel supporting, Czechian president supporting Zelensky. Then we have Mike Pence, Trump's own vice president in his first tenure. Mr. President, Ukraine did not start this war. Russia launched an unprovoked and brutal invasion, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. The road to peace must be built on the truth. Wow. That's a real slap round the face of Trump, or at least it should be. Trump will ignore that and brush it off. But that is exactly the rhetoric we want to hear. Then we have even Kemi Badenoch, who has got this decision in the UK at the moment, whether the Conservative Party, the opposition at the moment to Labour Party, whether they appeal to Reform voters because Reform have eaten half of their support. Do they go down a populist route, which Kemi Badenoch is a populist. So she's been going down a populist route to try and beat off the Reform voters. But then you're going to lose the centrist or centre-right small c Conservatives of old, who have been big C Conservatives as well. So what does she do about Zelensky, given that Reform voters are more likely to be favourable to Trump and not as favourable to Zelensky? So it's really good. The reason I'm including so much on this is good that Kemi Badenoch has come out and said Zelensky's not a dictator. He's a democratically elected leader of Ukraine, blah, 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 blah. Under my leadership and under successive conservative prime ministers, we have and always will stand with Ukraine. President Trump is right that Europe needs to pull its weight. And that, so she then goes to say, but Trump is right in this and we need to spend more, which is not wrong, by the way. But she's kind of footing on both sides of the fence. But as said, no, he's not a dictator. And I love this from Sky News. I'm not going to play it all. I'm going to miss out the quotes from Trump where they look at it, but this is great.
Well, Donald Trump made it pretty clear months before he won the election that one of his top priorities was going to be ending the war in Ukraine, and quickly. But over the last few days, we've heard an awful lot of analysis and opinion about the nature of the talks. Should they be happening in this way? Should they be happening at all? And people have different opinions on the compromises that might need to be made in order to stop the fighting and the best way of ensuring a peace that lasts. In journalism, it's important to reflect both sides of an argument, to listen, to try and understand nuance and different perspectives, to be aware of your own bias. But it's also important to call out and state the facts and to call out facts that are simply untrue. So with that in mind, I just want you to listen to what Donald Trump said at a press conference in Florida last night.
If we win, I'll get that thing settled before I take the office. I'll get it settled as president.
So then he goes on, and I love her sentiment there. It's like, yeah, we should be looking at both sides, but, when it comes to truth, there's only one side, and that is the truth.
You should never have started it. Ukraine should never have started it. Now, that is not true, and it should be called out. On the 24th of February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Their army attacked from Belarus, from Russia and Crimea.
And I love this. And then the next sort of minute and 40 seconds of this clip is her just methodically going through and fact-checking the crap out of Donald Trump. That's what needs to be done. You're watching the news. You're under no illusions that Trump has lied. He's lied, and here is the truth. We're going to call that out. We're going to call it for what it is, and here is the truth. So I love that from Sky News. That's absolutely brilliant. I love this. So let's listen to a bit of Jack Keane, General Jack Keane, who was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Donald Trump. As call to activism says, Trump is a traitor when even his loyal generals are calling him out.
He says that Zelensky
on Fox News
has a 4% approval rating. The numbers that we have seen are more in the 50% range, north of 50% range. And he's criticizing Zelensky for not holding elections. Now, clearly, this is something that Russia would like to see happen because they would love to get a Yanukovych or somebody who, is much more favorable to Russia into that seat.
And this is great. So this is when Fox News have on a proper news anchor, not one of their infotainment Jesse Waters prats, right? Greg Gutfeld and Jesse Waters and, whatever. Let's get on someone that knows, right, okay, they don't want, Putin's going to want elections because then he can put in a Yanukovych. Yes, this is precisely how you need to couch these questions and show that you understand what's going on and communicate to your Fox News audience what the reality really is.
Is the president undermining the election process? And can an election take place in the middle of this war at all, General?
Well, a couple of things. Yeah, Zelensky's polling as of February this month is 57% favorable. It was 52 in December. I mean, it was in the 90s and 22 when the war started. But obviously, he's got very favorable ratings. Look at the constitution that Ukraine has prohibits elections when you declare martial law because of a state of war takes place. And obviously, the incumbent who is trying to run a war to be involved in an election and bringing people together in primaries and other elections puts the people at risk. There's two other parts of that martial law. If you're 18 to 60 years of age and a male, you can't leave the country. And also they're curbing civil liberties, particularly freedom of movement by curfews in the contested areas. So the fact that their constitution is driving this, the parliament, bipartisan support for all the extensions they've had to the martial law. So they are acting democratically, in my judgment.
Absolutely. 100%.
And also the parliament is supporting it, which represents the people throughout the country. These are democratic actions taking place in a democratic country. I don't believe we should try and push elections on Zelensky during the middle of this war. I think if there is a peace agreement, I think Zelensky and others and the people themselves will demand an election, and it would likely take place assuming the peace agreement has some real legs to it.
Okay.
And that's what I want to see on Fox News. Of all places, whatever, Sky News, I mean, that's brilliant, Sky News. But the British, we're kind of like, we're receptive to, I mean, like I said to you the other day, I was watching Jonathan Ross, just a general chat show, and someone said, I don't want anything to do with, it was Brian Cox from Succession saying, I won't watch anything that's to do with Donald Trump. And the audience all were in big applause of that. Donald Trump doesn't have a good rep across the board in the UK. And we're not as receptive to the lies that he has. But Fox News is a different beast altogether. And so it's really good to see them, getting on these people who are challenging the narrative that is coming from Putin through Trump to the American audience. It's really good news. Zelensky, in response to all of these things, had all of these claims from Trump, had great support from everyone. As he mentions, he had a great conversation with Emmanuel Macron. Security guarantees, thank you for your support, diplomatic engagements, etc., etc. Same for Keir Starmer, exactly that. Thank you for your support. It was really nice to see such resounding support for Zelensky from right across the political landscape in Europe and beyond. Mehdi Hassan said, on the other hand, Dmitry Medvedev, right? So the former Russian president. So he was president when Putin was prime minister. Is that right? Or the other way around? Former Russian president. The former Russian president is delighted by Trump's remarks. So if Trump is saying stuff that is getting the vodka imbibing Dmitry Medvedev to stand up and applaud, then Trump is saying the wrong things. End of. He can't quite believe his country's luck. Quote from Medvedev, a dictator with he's quoting Trump here. A dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. End quote. To which Medvedev then says, if you told me just 3 months ago that these were the words of the US president, I would have laughed out loud. He's freaking loving it. He then says, Trump is 200% right. Bankrupt clown. As in talking about Zelensky being a bankrupt clown, I presume. It's just worrying. But, there are good people in American politics. The question is, are there enough of them on the Republican side? Here's a Democrat, Dick Durbin.
Goes off on wild tangents and says things that are clearly false. What is really hurtful about this the most is with the sacrifice of the Ukrainian people that we know has taken place. Thousands have died defending their country. And for the president to argue that they were somehow the aggressor in this action is disgraceful.
Why do you think he is, Senator?
I have no idea why he does these things.
Is it his conversation with Putin, do you think?
I don't know the motive behind it, but it is disgraceful, inexcusable. He owes an apology to the people of Ukraine.
Of course, he will never say sorry, Trump, but he does owe an apology to the people of Ukraine, 100%. And when he was then questioned about these polls, and there's been a number of reporters who've done this as well, this is how Trump responds. He says, the real polls, how can you be high when every city's been demolished? Somebody said, no, his polls are good. Give me a break. We had a rare earth deal and they broke it 2 days ago. We're going to come on to that in a second. Give me a break. This is the argument from incredulity. I can't believe it's true, so it can't be true. It just seems ridiculous, so it's not true. Yes, it is true. And by the way, not every city has been demolished. Have you been to Ukraine? You might know that if you went there. Not every city's been demolished, and his approval ratings are better than yours by about 10%. You wingnut. But his way of dealing with empirical evidence is to dismiss it out of hand. It can't be true. You've given me evidence, it can't be true. Every city's been demolished. It can't be true. You can't have good poll ratings. Yes, you can. What are you talking about? Now we're hearing, and The Economist reported today, that Trump wants to remove Zelensky. According to The Economist, publication states that Trump sees Zelensky as an obstacle and may cut military aid, Intel access, Starlink, and lifting sanctions on Russia. All of that is terrible, and it's exactly what I was worried about. I really didn't want this to happen, but it's looking like it very may well. And remember, we haven't got to the worst part yet. The worst part is just about to come. So Republicans here have reacted to Zelensky calling Trump calling Zelensky a dictator. Toon, who is the Senate Majority Leader, said Russia is the aggressor here. Remember that statement. That's going to be very important in a second. Russia's the aggressor here. Tom Tillis said there's no moral equivalency between Putin and Zelensky. Kramer, from Texas, said, I think he is, Trump is factually wrong about Zelensky. Even Kennedy said, I trust Putin. This is a Republican Kennedy. I trust Putin like I trust a gas station sushi. That's not RFK Jr. That is another Kennedy who normally says some batshit crazy stuff. But these people have come out and at least challenged Trump's rhetoric there. Now, that tune has said Russia's the aggressor here. Get a load of this. So here, I'm now going to hit you with two things that I think just really... Like, I was listening to the former chief from 2014 to 2020 of MO6 on Newsnight. Fantastic interview. You have to go and watch it. We're going to play a little clip of it in a minute. I came away thinking, do you know what? This is just a bump in the road. And actually, Trump is just sounding off. And this is Trump, but actually, he'll be drawn back in by the reality of the situation. And we will get to a negotiated settlement that will hopefully be to the benefit of Ukraine. But there are going to be bumps in the road. And this is a bump in the road. That was when I was like at my calmest last night. And then today I see these next two news items. And I'm like, oh crap. No, it is as bad as I thought. And Trump is an absolute tit. I'm back to like dooming about everything and about how the US is just the enemy. The US is now politically aligned with Russia. How do we know this? Well, this for a start. This is shocking, says Shashank Joshi from The Economist. Quote, the US is opposing calling Russia the aggressor in a G7 statement on the third anniversary of Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, threatening to derail a traditional show of unity, according to 5 Western officials. That's the Financial Times. Alex Pitzas says, Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia is the aggressor. It's not difficult. US is opposing calling Russia the aggressor. How have we got here? How have we got to a point where the US has just started fully and almost formally aligning themselves with Russia? It's absolutely incredible. And then it gets worse. So, for the first time since the beginning of the war, the United States will not co-sponsor a UN resolution in support of Ukraine, according to Reuters. It is known that the current resolution condemning Russian aggression was supported by more than 50 countries. Quote, attempts are underway to enlist the support of other states, including those in the global south. The sources said it won't even be supported by the United States. As Christopher Miller says, as Trump appeases Putin, the US administration avoids calling Russia's invasion a war or aggression. So they're not calling it a war. It's now what? A special military operation? This is disgusting. USA, like I was trying to be as charitable to Trump's positioning as possible. This has gone full on disgusting. Falsely claims Ukraine started it. Now, as much as ever, we must highlight the brutality of Russia's actions and its responsibility. And then Tatrugami says, as Donald Trump accuses Ukraine and attacks Zelensky while siding with Putin, the Financial Times has released a video investigation detailing numerous war crimes and executions of Ukrainian POWs by Russians. I just finished watching it. Highly recommend. So just to let you know, and I haven't actually yet seen it, and this is what Christopher Miller's talking about here. Just to let you know who the aggressors are and what's going on, there is it's called Film Me, Russia's executions of Ukrainian POW points to blah, blah, blah. Not to dismiss that, sorry. It looks to be a very important and timely piece that shows that the Russians aren't just the aggressors. They're morally reprehensible in their executions and torture of Ukrainian prisoners of war. What a good time to release that, given the position that the US appears to have in claiming they're not the aggressors. Now, Stratcom Center reports that Putin's obedient sycophant Tucker Carlson. On the other hand, here's a video showing how disgusting the Russians are, and Tucker Carlson is producing flat-out Russian propaganda. He's produced a video churned out on yet another Ukraine persecutes Christians propaganda piece for his Kremlin masters. This time, the screeching conspiracy theorist interviewed a Canadian lawyer whose once legitimate career has since collapsed into full-time shilling for the Russian government. And then it goes back. I don't know if this is if they've dug this up again or whether Tucker Carlson is again going back to this Robert Amsterdam because he has used him before. But anyway, just to remind you about Tucker Carlson's positioning on things and his position as a top Kremlin propagandist. As it says here, once again, Carlson proves his loyalty to Moscow and not the truth. Okay, but even Mike Walls, who some people were hoping was going to be sensible and good for Ukraine, he was part of the Riyadh contingent, and he didn't do, I don't think, nearly a good enough job out there. US National Security Advisor Mike Walls says the era of endless war of attrition is over, and Ukraine must see opportunities in granting access to its resources. Don't worry about the war. The war of attrition is all over. What you need to be worrying about or thinking about the opportunities we can give you when we extract 50% of your natural resources. Think about those opportunities, Ukraine. Quote, US taxpayers deserve reimbursement. Instead, we hear escalation rhetoric and resistance, which President Trump won't tolerate. Shashank Joshi says, let's go to what JD Vance says first. And this is absolutely shocking and completely typical. So let's listen to JD Vance, who is the vice president. This is moralistic garbage, which is unfortunately the rhetorical currency of the globalists because they have nothing else to say. For 3 years, President Trump and I had made two simple arguments. First, the war wouldn't have started if Trump was in office. Second, that neither Europe nor the Biden administration nor the Ukrainians had a pathway to victory. This was true 3 years ago. It was true 2 years ago, and it was true last year, and it's true today, which is ridiculous. Like, how can Zelensky doesn't have a pathway to ending this war when he'd just been invited? He's talking about 3 years ago, literally in February when they were invaded. You don't have a pathway to peace here. We've just been invaded. People are calling for me to be evacuated out of the country. What do you mean a pathway to peace? We've been invaded by a global superpower. So this is ridiculous from JD Vance. It is incredibly insulting. For 3 years, the concerns of the people who were obviously right were ignored. What is Niall's actual plan for Ukraine? So he's talking about probably Niall Ferguson. Another aid package. Is he aware of the reality on the ground, of the numerical advantage of the Russians, the depleted stock of the Europeans, or even their more depleted industrial base? Instead, he quotes from a book about George H.W. Bush from a different historical period and a different conflict. That's another currency of these people, reliance on irrelevant history. President Trump is dealing with reality, which means dealing with facts. Really? Really? Because we just heard all his claims were not factual. So you can stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Here are some facts, says JD Vance. Number one, while our Western allies' security has benefited greatly from the generosity of the United States, they pursue domestic policies on migration and censorship that offend the sensibilities of most Americans, and defense policies that assume continued over-reliance. Woke, whatever. Number two, Russians have a massive numerical advantage in manpower and weapons in Ukraine, and that advantage will persist regardless of whether Western aid packages regardless of further Western aid packages. Again, the aid is currently flowing, he says in asterisks. Number three, the United States retains substantial leverage over both parties to the conflict. Number four, ending the conflict requires talking to the people involved in starting it and maintaining it. Number five, the conflict has placed and continues to place stress on tools of American statecraft, from military stockpiles to sanctions and so much else. We believe the continued conflict is bad for Russia, bad for Ukraine and bad for Europe, but most importantly is bad for the United States. Given the above facts, we must pursue peace, and we must pursue it now. Trump ran on this, he won on this, and he's right about that. It is lazy, ahistorical nonsense to attack as appeasement every acknowledgement that America's interests must account for the realities of the conflict. That interest, not moralisms or historical literacy, will guide President Trump's policy in the weeks to come. And thank God for that. It's just, there's so much wrong with that. I don't have time to get into it, but I think Shashank Joshi says it best. This is bullshit. Quote, Russians have a massive numerical advantage in manpower and weapons in Ukraine, and that advantage will persist regardless of further Western aid packages. Well, actually, they're really struggling for equipment right now, and if you knew what you were talking about, JD Vance, and you've been following channels like mine, you might actually know that. You absolute gargantuan bag of mouldy toenails. Right, Trump says Scott Bessent, a Treasury secretary who went and tried to force the rare earth minerals deal on Zelensky. Quote, Bessent actually went to Ukraine and was treated pretty rough because they basically said no. Really? That might be not being treated roughly. That's being treated realistically when you try and extort 50% of Ukraine's natural resources. Anyway, and Zelensky was asleep and couldn't meet with him. He went there to sign a document, and when he got there, he came back empty-handed. They wouldn't sign the document. No, because it was crap. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to get too angry. Trump claims he's right. Okay, so then you listen to this.
Can you resurrect that deal? Is there anything that you can do?
I think I'm going to resurrect it. We'll see what happens, but I'm going to.
He's going to resurrect the minerals deal, so the 50% of Ukraine's natural resources type thing.
Resurrected, or things are not going to make him too happy. And look, it's time for elections. Haven't had an election in a long time. It's wonderful to say, we can't have an election, but it's time for elections. And it's also time to find out what happened with all the money. Because he made the statement that half of it, he doesn't know where it is, or something like that.
He's blaming the Americans. He's not saying we don't know where the money is because we've lost it in Ukraine. He's saying you promised us this and we haven't got half of it. You don't even understand what he's saying, but no one's correcting him. No one's sitting him down and briefing him. He's not having briefings. This man is a danger to the world.
And I'd like to find out all the money that we've been sending to Ukraine. Where is it? And I can tell you we're doing very well with Russia. We're going to do something with Russia that he was unable to do. We can make a deal with Russia to stop the killing of, potentially additional millions of people. The soldiers are being just wiped out on both sides, wiped out. It's horrible. The weaponry today is so powerful.
Oh, whatever. Yeah, shut up. As Noel Report says, the audacity is stunning of that man. Then we've had Keith Kellogg meeting with Zelensky today, but the Americans cancelled a press conference afterwards. So Zelensky met with Keith Kellogg. A press conference was supposed to take place after the meeting, and at the request of the American side, it was cancelled, journalists have reported. Right, we are now going to listen. I advise if you are in the UK, please go and watch the entire Newsnight from, was it last night? I think it was last night. Was it night before? Goodness me, no, it's last night. Go and watch it. It's an absolute must watch. I'm going to play you a little bit of what the former head of MI6 in the UK 2014 to 2020 said about the war and about stuff. This is fascinating stuff.
I think we are in a new era where, by and large, international relations aren't going to be determined by rules and multilateral institutions. They're going to be determined by strong men and deals. I think of the Yalta Treaty at the end of 1945, where three strong men, as they were then, on behalf of the big countries, the strong countries, decided the fate of small countries. I think that's Donald Trump's mindset, certainly Putin's mindset. It's Xi Jinping's mindset. It's not Europe's mindset. That's the world we're going into for a whole set of reasons, and I don't think we're going back to the one we had before.
Why do you say that?
Because the one we had before was based on the unipolar moment where America had both the means and the will to assert itself across the world. It created what we call globalization, the international security structure. It's now a significantly smaller player relative to others than it was. And of course, its will to be that person has diminished. So it still remains a prodigious country. You underestimate America at your peril, but its ability to make the rules across the world, that's not there now. We are seeing deals, we're seeing a conversation about spheres of influence, and I think the only people who haven't woken up to this reality is us.
Europe.
Yeah, and there's an entry ticket to this conversation, it appears, and sadly it's not our soft power or our values, it's hard power, and it leaves the category challenge for us in Europe. How do we develop that to get ourselves a seat in this conversation? No, I think it's unfortunate, and I agree with Catherine, this will be emboldening to Putin. I don't know whether Donald Trump actually buys the Russian line, but I think the Russians probably think he does, and I think that significantly diminishes his leverage. And I saw this happen in Afghanistan, where he gave away the...
It's really important. Like, there's a lot to be learnt about Afghanistan, where he went over the Afghanistan government's head and did a deal with the Taliban that was a shite deal, and then he blamed Biden about getting out of Afghanistan, but it was based on a Doha deal that he had put in place that was a terrible deal. And no one has challenged Trump publicly enough on that. A lot of people have sucked up the narrative that, oh, it's Biden's fault that it was, that it was a poor withdrawal from Afghanistan, but they were working to the plan that was put in place, that was agreed upon by Trump, and it was a bad plan, as your man here says.
It does, and I think that significantly diminishes his leverage. And I saw this happen in Afghanistan, where he gave away the biggest concession before we even started. It's a strange art of the deal, honestly. Zelensky and Trump, they're in their way different politicians. Zelensky had no choice, I think, but to respond when he was accused of lacking democratic legitimacy. And Donald Trump is notoriously thin-skinned, and we've got into this spat. I do not think we should read too much into it. These negotiations.
So, absolutely right that he is thin-skinned. So he is thin-skinned, but this is where Young talks about how, you know, don't worry too much about it, bumps in the road type thing. And now with what's further been said today, I don't think that is the case. But there's so much more in well, let's just listen to it.
At a very early stage, they're going to be highly complicated. Exactly as I expected, Russia has gone maximal to the point that they may even have overreached. It's going to be very, very hard for Trump to cut through this in a way that produces anything that isn't an abject humiliation.
What do you mean Russia have overreached? What do you mean?
The issue is that Trump and Putin are talking about different things. So Trump thinks this is about territory, characteristically as a real estate guy. It's about land, giving land to Russia in return for peace. It's not about territory, and Putin said it's about sovereignty. Putin was super clear when he started this war that the existence of Ukraine as a sovereign and free country was 100%. An unacceptable affront to Russian security. He will not stop until Ukraine isn't a country anymore. And that is a completely different conversation. And by the way, there's more. There's Europe NATO putting constraints on its presence in Eastern Europe and going back to previous borders in '97. This is well out of scope. I don't think it's stuff that Donald Trump has clearly thought about. But you're instantly into it. Russia came out today and said they wouldn't accept Western troops in Ukraine. Of course they said that. They are determined that Ukraine should be an undefended basket case. But we're talking about security guarantees as a necessary endgame. It still feels, for all of this bluster, a fundamentally irreconcilable problem.
Right. How worried should people who are watching tonight be?
Well, I think...
Go and watch the rest of it, but it's fundamentally irreconcilable. Absolutely agree with that. Yeah, really good insights there from Younger. And unfortunately, Scott Bessent has said that if the US needs to, so the Treasury Secretary, they will lift sanctions against Russia. He also said that many of Zelensky's statements in Munich were inappropriate. Wow. So you've got the worst case scenario appearing to be far more plausible, which is lifting of sanctions. Now, just a few more bits and pieces to go through. Michael Weiss, Zelensky has survived a dozen-plus assassination attempts by Russia, including a special forces assault on his presidential complex. He stood up to Trump. I'm sure he'll be deeply impressed to learn our congressional Republicans live as terrified hostages in their own party leader. So, you know, this guy's an incredibly brave guy, Zelensky. He didn't want a flight out of Kiev. He wanted weapons. He stayed there. He's had assassination attempt after assassination attempt. And yet we're hearing here Brian Stelter from CNN is saying in private, Republicans talk about their fear that Trump might incite his MAGA followers to commit political violence against him if they don't rubber stamp his elections. And here's a huge problem, is that the Republicans, there are a number of Republicans who would support Zelensky hugely and support continued aid to Ukraine hugely, but they are scared of their future in the Republican Party. And we are also hearing, I mean, this is common knowledge, right? I've heard of testaments from people saying, I've been in meetings with all the Republican senators where Trump came in. This was during the first, I think, administration, where Trump would come in and speak to all the Republican senators, go out, and then they'd all laugh at Trump afterwards. And they all laugh at him because everyone thought he was a douche, right? Everyone there is like, he's a douche, but they're completely beholden to him. And this is what's happening yet again, because it's even worse because you have Elon Musk threatening the might of his billions to pit against these people. So this is what here Eric Swalwell, a Democrat, talks to.
He's a petty, punitive child. And I can recognize a toddler because I'm a parent of 3 of them. And I recognize the same behavior. And yes, censorship is occurring. but it's self-censorship. And it's by you all. Because I hear you in our private conversations when you agree that Trump is a child. I hear the people you tell that Trump is a child, whether it's lobbyists or reporters. But you shrink in this room and you shrink in the chamber and you self-censor yourselves from speaking out because you're afraid. And he's laughing at you that you take him so seriously because he's unserious. He's laughing that you think he is so powerful because he's weak. He's laughing that you think he is so big because he's quite small.
Absolutely agree with that, and there's all sorts of evidence to suggest that. I mean, there are those in the American Congress who are deeply supportive of Ukraine and of Zelensky. Here is a statement from Representative Brian Fitzpatrick that I think you should read. I'll put that on the screen now. I'm not going to read through it because I need to shoot off in a second. But I think that is the exact kind of rhetoric we need to hear right across Congress. But I am despairing for where the United States is at the moment. This is an official statement from the White House, a press release. And as Shashank Joshi from The Economist says, these are disgusting scare quotes. So, quote from the White House: "Through our budgets, the DoD will once again resource warfighting and cease unnecessary spending that set our military back under the previous administration, including through so-called, scare quotes, climate change and other woke programs." In other words, climate change is not real and it's a woke thing. No, the science is there. Deal with it, you bunch of dingbats. But this is where we're at now. Of course, you know, it's worth remembering, and it is a great montage of Trump's different quotes from 2023, 2024, 2025 January, and 2025 February. Trump in his populist fiction of ending the war in Ukraine. "I'll fix it in 24 hours." Quote. I'll end it before the inauguration. Quote. "Hopefully in 6 months." Quote. "Maybe in a year." Quote. What is it? Are you lying, or do you not understand geopolitics and you are sounding off irresponsibly? Neither of those are good for you, and that is deeply irresponsible. Now, with American military aid, Ukraine may not be able to hold out against Russia for more than 6 months, says Le Monde, citing a Lieutenant General Romanenko. He added that Europe will not be able to replace American aid. And that's the problem. There is a dilemma here that Ukraine needs the US. But if they go down the right Europe, let's circle around the wagons and help Ukraine route, the US aren't going to help them. And if the US get their own way, they will only help them if Ukraine prostitutes itself to the US and gives them all of their natural resources and screws themselves over. There is no good outcome for Ukraine now, and it's not due to Putin, or is due to Putin ultimately, but the no good outcome part of this is due to Donald Trump's positioning. End of. Now, Anne Applebaum says that, quoting Casey Michel here, that when Trump was coming in, the US was on the verge of a major anti-corruption reform, and that got scrapped when Trump took office. So with all those other things I listed earlier, anti-corruption was also scrapped. And this is the work of a dictator. How do we know it's the work of a dictator? What does a dictator do? The dictator controls information. We are hearing now, here is a leaked letter. It is a department-wide review of media subscriptions. The department is conducting a broad review of spending to ensure resources align with the secretary's highest priorities. In other words, ideological agenda. The media subscriptions for these 6 companies will be terminated immediately. No department is allowed to have freedom of thoughts and the ability to subscribe to The Economist, The New York Times, Politico, Bloomberg Newsfeed, Associated Press, and Reuters. Basic news agencies. No, it's got to be, one presumes, Breitbart, The Daily Caller, etc., etc. It's just absolutely shocking. That's what a dictator does. And this is what a dictator does, or indeed a monarch does. Congestion pricing is dead. Manhattan and all of New York is saved. Long live the king. That was written in capitals by Donald J. Trump and was reposted by the White House. So the official line of the White House, with Trump on a picture of Time magazine, Long live the king, as a king, seeing Donald Trump as a king. Dry off those Boston tea leaves. Let's bring back the monarchy. I'll tell you what, you'd probably do a hell of a lot better job if you came back under our monarchy, not him as a king. Come back under Prince Charlie. Charlie boy, I'll sort you guys out, because at the moment, I think you're in trouble. Anyway, let's have a revolution to become a monarchy again, but part of the British Empire. Yeah, of course. Okay. Trump has now accused federal workers of playing golf after spending Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday himself on the golf course. And in fact, there's video evidence of him on the golf course. There's, what's the website? Trump Golf or something. There is a website that tracks how much he plays golf. And one analysis has claimed that he's had spent 17% of the time playing golf. Another has said, 27% of the time or something. Another has said 17 out of the last 30 days was spent at Mar-a-Lago. So he's not at the White House, he's at Mar-a-Lago, et cetera, et cetera. It's terrible, absolutely terrible. Pekka Kallianiemi is saying that Finnish journalist Mikko Martinen has a much simpler explanation for Trump's recent speeches. Quote, Trump, 78, is the most dim-witted president of modern US history, and old age has made him even dumber. That could be it. Now, he's made decisions about USAID. $300 million worth of medications are sitting on pallets about to expire thanks to Trump's effort to gut foreign aid. These drugs would have prevented people from going blind from a preventable tropical disease. Donald Trump would rather waste them in East African warehouse. The willful, deadly cruelty of Trump Musk. Now, I spoke to my mate today, who is an academic, and he was speaking to another academic yesterday who said, I know of 100 academics that have lost their job like that because of USAID funding cuts. And she also said, and I know another 100 who think they're going to lose their job and really worried. And it's not that I'm so worried about those academics that lost their jobs in the US, although that is bad. But it's those that have lost, she said, I know a PhD now, someone working on a new project, who's from Zambia, who has lost their job. It's from low and middle income countries that these people are aspiring. They are adding to the scientific knowledge of the world. And just like that, everyone's lost their jobs. And she said, and it's not so much about people losing their jobs, as terrible as that is, and these lives that are being ruined, but it's about the cadre of scientific knowledge, because they're also deleting scientific research off of websites in the United States. The NIH, what are we hearing as well? Where is it? Yes. Awful. Numerous scientists and researchers were just fired at NIH's Center for Treating Alzheimer's, sources tell me. They fear Trump Musk cuts could dramatically set back our ability to treat dementia. And that's being reported in the New Republic, and that's happening all over the place. Just slash, don't really care what we're cutting. Oh, look, we've made $8 billion worth of savings, said Elon Musk, put it up on the website. It turns out he misread $8 million and put it as 8 billion. And that's what they're telling everyone. They couldn't even read numbers. 8 million becomes 8 billion. Just blows my mind. And then that's the disinformation they are sowing, or in that case, misinformation. But then when they don't correct it and correct it enough, it becomes disinformation. Trump and Elon Musk are firing disabled veterans who work at the VA hospitals. Can still afford $22 billion in SpaceX contracts, though, but just for those poor VA disabled veterans. Can't have them working, so we'll cut those jobs. And it turns out, apparently, according to what's her name? Musk has hoovered up further contracts since the beginning of the government as well. It's the Democratic Congresswoman from Texas. Anyway, you know who it is. My brain has gone nuts. Anyway, Anne Applebaum. We are hearing that, well, CNN put in a Freedom of Information request to the United States. And the Trump administration has quietly fired multiple officials on OPM's privacy team, including those who are part of the Freedom of Information team, in a move that limits outside access to records related to Doge security clearances. So when you put a Freedom of Information request on what's happening with Doge, they can't fulfill that because they sacked all the people that do that. Good luck with that, says Amapaban. They just fired whole privacy team, and OPM email address responded to that's not her quoting that, sorry, that's an email going back to CNN. Good luck with that. They just fired the whole privacy team. Good luck with your freedom of information. You can't do freedom of information requests. Now they're holding back information that would hold Doge accountable. This is autocracy, this is dictatorship, this is terrible. And then Elon Musk saying, if any judge anywhere can stop every presidential action everywhere, we do not live in a democracy. So in other words, if the president is beholden to law, we don't live in a democracy. What's your interpretation of democracy? That's either monarchy or dictatorship. And as Elliot Higgins says, Elon wants to be the president to be king. And then we go back to that tweet from the White House and the picture of Elon Musk in a crown. So Elon Musk wants the president not to be answerable to law and judges. Democracy is apparently not being answerable to law. Meanwhile, 14 people have died in Kentucky, 1,000 have been rescued, and several states face massive flooding, and yet Trump, who posted in recent days about Daytona 500, Elon Musk, Democrats in Ukraine, hasn't said a word about Kentucky and the victims. Trump doesn't give a crap about ordinary Americans. In fact, he is not visiting anywhere, any of the plane crashes, any of that, and yet when Joe Biden didn't visit Pennsylvania to see, I think it was Pennsylvania, where they had that train crash where no one died, he got excoriated by Republicans, and yet they're absolutely silent because they have double standards and they are complete hypocrites when Donald Trump does nothing to support any disaster and show any remorse and show any kind of empathy at all. The man is a moral black hole, and the Republican Party is presently getting sucked into it. Shashant Joshi says Elon Musk's power of the purse. Quote, Republican senators find themselves in an unusual position these days. They're begging Trump officials to release funds they themselves appropriated. Congress has appropriated funding. Elon Musk has come in and cut all that funding. And now Congress people are having to go back to Trump to release funding that should already be out there. This is absolutely ridiculous. And that's in the Washington Post there. And fascinating relationship here between Steve Bannon, who used to be the Grim Reaper behind the Oval Office resolute desk behind Donald Trump at the beginning of his first administration. Bannon taking the evil Gherkin role in the new administration, says Elliot Higgins. This is a quote from Steve Bannon, who is a massive, he's one of the masterminds behind the present administration's efforts. And yet he says Musk is, quote, Musk is a parasitic illegal immigrant. He wants to play act as God without any respect for the country's history, values or traditions. I don't usually pay much attention to inner circle conflict, but this one could be significant, said Leah McElrath there. Indeed, watch out for that one. Steve Bannon absolutely hates Elon Musk. Rory Stewart says of this, okay, what's this about? So this is, in this video, Silicon Valley billionaire and venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, a Trump donor, openly argues in the support of an oligarchy. And we have heard Peter Thiel say liberalism and democracy are tired. In other words, we should not have democracy anymore. We should have, and in fact, what do these people want? These guys are called tech authoritarians or tech fascists, sometimes techno-fascists. And that's a real movement. That's not like a pejorative. These people want democracy to be replaced with technocrats or the technocracy, if that's a word, not as in technical experts, but in technology. They want the broligarchs to be responsible for making decisions and not the people. They think the people aren't good enough and it should be done by tech, and then you can talk about AI and all sorts as well. So they are openly dissing democracy now. Just beware, because these are the people who funded Trump, and these Peter Thiel is responsible for JD Vance, put him up for being senator of Ohio and funded that, and actually employed him in his venture capital firm. And so Peter Thiel, South African, David Sachs, South African, Elon Musk, South African. These people are all tech oligarchs and tech fascists. And then you've got Mark Andreessen as well thrown into that. And these guys, the question is, are they the ones pulling the strings? And I'm going to leave you with something that I love. So Congressman Robert Garcia called in public Elon Musk a dick recently. And this is my favorite bit of television recently.
I want to hear why, but do you think that calling Elon Musk a dick is effective messaging for confronting what is a potentially irreversible transformation of the U.S. government?
Well, he is a dick. And I think
I love it. I'm just going to leave that there. Well, he is a dick. So, as doomy as the world is at the moment, as horrible as the news is, just remember that Robert Garcia is on the money. Absolute. Well, he is a dick. I mean, he is one. Why would I not say that? I mean, he literally is one. Metaphorically is one. Okay. Talaria has done a change.org petition, I think it is. Is it change.org? Yes. To only just started, so there's only 37 signatures. I'm going to put it on the description to the video. Please go and put your name to it, which is kick out Russia from the UN. Kick the imposter out of the UN. So you can go and read about that. She's put lots of great information. I've interviewed her before. Please go and help that out and then share it. Let's get this moving. Let's get this out and about. Share. Let's get a really big movement to get the UN kicking Russia out of its, well, particularly its security, out the UN Security Council, but also out the UN entirely. And you can look at the history of how they are there and how it's not right that they're in there in the way that they are, due to the fact that they just assumed the Soviet Union's position in a way that any country like, for example, Ukraine could have assumed a seat at the UN Security Council, but Russia did that because they just assumed they were the new iteration of the USSR, even though they aren't. They would have to reapply to UN properly, etc., etc. So go and check that out and jump in on that. Hopefully that was of use. Take care, guys, and speak to you soon.